Violent themes have commonly appeared in all of our media through novels, television shows, movies, and comic books. One of the more recent and popular forms of media featuring violence is video games, which allow a player to participate in and initiate the violence rather than only participating as a spectator. For almost 40 years, there have been some controversy around the release of violent video games and a call for some of them to be banned. But do video games actually cause real-world violence? During this dialectic inquiry, I'll be discussing the history and progression of violence in games, censorship, the popularity of violent games, and the research and studies around the actual effects of playing violent games. The first controversy over a violent video game release began in 1976, only 5 years after the first ever arcade video game was released. This game was called Death Race 2000, was based around a 1975 movie with the same title. This movie was set in a dystopian future and is centered around a cross-country car race, which requires contestants to run down innocent pedestrians to gain points. These points are tallied based on each kill's brutality. The game Death Race 2000 was released by video game creator Exidy and allowed 1 or 2 players to control an on-screen car with a steering wheel and an acceleration pedal. The objective of this game is to run down gremlins that are fleeing the vehicle, and as a player hits them, they squeal and are replaced by on-screen tombstones. This game was criticised by the media and prompted a 60-minute investigation on the psychological impact of video games. In 1983, a video game called Custer's Revenge was released for the Atari by the video game creator Mystique, who produced a number of adult video game titles for the system. This game offended gamers with its misogyny and racism and its fantastically primitive gameplay. In this game, a player controlled a naked image of General Custer, dodging arrows in an attempt to cross the screen and shockingly rape a pixelated image of an American Indian woman bound to a post. Women's rights groups criticized the game, stating that it was a simulation of rape, and Women Against Pornography, Native American spokespersons, and critics of the video game industry in general protested about the game. This game was banned in Oklahoma City. However, the media attention caused the game to sell approximately 80,000 copies, twice as many copies as Mystique's other adult-only games. In 1993, Doom was released by ID Software, and was a science fiction, horror-themed first-person shooter. It is considered one of the most significant and influential titles in the video game industry, for sparking the popularity of the first-person shooter genre. Doom allows players to assume the role of a space marine, who fights his way through hordes of invading demons from hell. Doom was criticised by religious organisations for its diabolic undertones, and it prompted fears that virtual reality technology could be used to simulate extremely realistic killing. Doom was a major focus of the 1993 congressional hearings about violent video games. Another game which was at the centre of these hearings was Mortal Kombat. Released in 1992 by Midway Games, Mortal Kombat was the first video game to feature lifelike, realistic violence. It contained photo-quality graphics, blows resulted in splashes of blood, and it allowed players to rip out each other's hearts and spines with special button combinations called finishing moves. In 1994, an outcry of Mortal Kombat's violence led to the creation of the Electronic Software Ratings Board, a rating system designed to regulate the age of children given access to certain games. A rating of M for mature limited the game to players aged 17 and over, and the rating AO for adults only meant that the game was removed from the shelves of most major retailers. These censorship ratings have acted in a way similar to the film and television industry by assisting parents to regulate their children's exposure to violence. Since the creation of the Electronic Software Ratings Board, games with violent themes have consistently grown in popularity and are at the forefront of the gaming industry. One of the most popular violent game series is Call of Duty, which was first released by Infinity Ward and Activision in 2003. There are now 22 games in the main series and console releases, and these games have sold 130 million copies in total. The Call of Duty games are military first-person shooters that involve killing using realistic guns, knives, grenades, and rocket launchers. Cinematic sequences can contain more dramatic material, with people burning to death, melee kills including decapitations, torture, crates containing dead bodies, and death of civilians. These games are rated MA15+. The most popular violent video game series to date is Grand Theft Auto. Since its release in 1998, Rockstar has released 7 Grand Theft Auto games, which have sold over 185 million. Grand Theft Auto allows players to kill hundreds of gang members, police officers, and civilians with a large array of weaponry and vehicles. The largest controversy towards Grand Theft Auto occurred when a player uncovered Hot Coffee, which was a sub-game hidden within Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. This sub-game allowed players to simulate explicit sex, and caused the game's rating to be upgraded from mature to adults only. For many years, there have been claims that these popular violent video games lead to violent acts and crimes, which has led to calls for tightening of legislation and censorship laws. An example of these claims occurred in 1999 when 176 newspaper articles across the country focused on the allegation that video games were the cause of the tragic massacre of 13 people at Columbine High School in Jefferson County. These 2 teenage shooters were revealed to be avid players of weapon-based combat games Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. The tech shooting in 2007 was also blamed on video games, with Dr. Phil and Republican candidate Mitt Romney arguing that video games were the cause of the shooting, and attorney Jack Thompson blaming the tragedy on violent game Counter-Strike. To further understand whether any of these claims are substantiated, it's important to review the results of research around the psychological effects of games containing violence. The first study was performed by Villanova University and Rutgers University and was published by Markey and French in 2014. Their research demonstrates a relationship into the number of violent crimes in the US versus the popularity of violent video games. This study found that when shooting game sales increase, crime numbers tend to drop. Co-author Markey stated that there could be multiple reasons why this is the case, and suggests that people who are attracted to violence tend to be among those who enjoy violent games, and that these games may act as a catharsis. He also states that people who enjoy fantasy violence are more likely to be seated in front of a screen where the potential for real-world violence is decreased. This suggests that because violent individuals are playing violent video games in their homes, there may be a decrease in violent crimes when popular video games are released. Another study was performed by the Oxford Internet Institute and the University of Rochester in the US. The research was designed to determine whether it was violence in games which made players feel more aggressive, or a combination of other factors. During the study, the researchers modified first-person shooter Half-Life 2 by allowing a player to tag foes who would then evaporate, instead of violently removing enemies. During the study, the modified version was tested alongside the normal violent version, and only some of the gamers were given a tutorial before playing the game. The researchers discovered that the players who had not had the tutorial felt less competent and more aggressive, rather than the people who had played the more violent version of the game. While discussing the results of his research, Dr. Polbisky stated, "We focused on the motives of people who play electronic games and found players have a psychological need to come out on top when playing. If players feel thwarted by the controls or design of the game, they can wind up feeling aggressive. This need to master the game was far more significant than whether the game contained violent material." Co-author, Professor Richard Ryan from the University of Rochester, found that the aggression stems from feeling not in control or incompetent while playing. If the structure of a game or the design of the controls thwarts enjoyment, it is not the violent content that seems to drive the feelings of aggression. Another study was published in the journal JAMA Pediatrics with the scientists led by Craig Anderson, director of the Center for the Study of Violence at Iowa State University. This study worked with children in the 3rd, 4th, 7th and 8th grades in Singapore. During the study, Anderson and his colleagues asked the children 3 times over a period of 2 years detailed questions about their video game habits and gave them standardized questions designed to measure their aggressive behavior and attitudes towards violence. Overall, the students' scores on aggressive behavior, as well as hostile attitudes and fantasies about violence against others, declined slightly throughout the study as the children got older. However, the study also suggests that kids who play more hours of violent video games per week had an increased aggressive thoughts compared to those who played fewer hours per week. When asked if it was okay for a boy to strike a peer if that peer said something negative about them, the kids were more likely to say yes. The more long-term gamers were also more likely to fantasize about hitting someone they didn't like. When discussing the results of this study, Anderson stated that it shows that repeated exposure to violent video games can increase aggressive thinking. In response to this research, Ryan Hall, a psychiatrist at the University of Central Florida, stated, "I don't think we have enough science to suggest that playing video games causes violence in children any more than watching violence on TV, and there is no indication at this time that violent video games are training killers." This study does demonstrate the importance of censorship laws in games and other forms of media. However, the question of whether the aggression is short-term or long-term, and whether the aggressive thoughts may lead to aggressive actions, is not demonstrated in this study. Violent video games have developed significantly in realism and gameplay since the first controversy over Death Race in 1976. They have grown to be one of the most popular forms of media and continue to grow with new games being released every month. The introduction of the ratings board and censorship laws have assisted in protecting children from violent graphics and themes. However, further studies need to be performed to demonstrate a link between violence in games and violent acts before there was a modification of censorship legislation and banning of games. To date, there has been no conclusive study to suggest that virtual violence motivates players to commit real-life violent acts. It is important to ensure that game releases are not regulated in a way that causes designers to lose their artistic freedom and stops consumers participating in a virtual game world of their choosing. I will conclude this presentation with a video of an unlikely consumer enjoying the frustration release of playing through the eyes of their virtual character in Grand Theft Auto.
Hello, what do you do for a living? Work for British Gas, do you? You wanker. I'll give you put my bills up. Bastard, bang, you take that. You won't put them up no more. Bang, one for you and one for you. I'll give you one as well. You come here. I'll get you, you bastard. Come back. I'll give you central heating. You want central heating, babe? You've got it. Oh, yeah. You take that. Oh, take my factory money out the wall, will you? Scum, you won't get no more of my money. No, you gas bastard. Scum, you're all scum. Ooh, take that. Take that. Ooh. Where's the next bastard up? Hey! Hey! Come on, drive, drive. Oh, that's it. That's the end of you lot.
Thank you.